For decades, Richard Gere was Hollywood's ultimate romantic hero. On screen, he chased love with charm and confidence. Off-screen, his heart remained a mystery. From supermodels to actresses, marriages that ended, and whispered affairs, the question always lingered: would he ever find lasting love? Now, at 74, Gere finally breaks his silence with one tearful confession. She's the love of my life. This isn't a movie. It's real. A story of second chances, soulful connection, and a bond that defied the odds. After a lifetime of searching, Gere didn't just find love. He found home. And he's finally ready to share it. A lifetime of faces, but no forever. From American Gigolo to Pretty Woman, Richard Gere became the face of cinematic romance, seductive, mysterious, and heartbreakingly charming. Audiences fell in love with him over and over. But behind that on-screen passion was a man who struggled to find a lasting connection in real life. For years, his personal life became a puzzle. Tabloids couldn't quite piece together. He dated famous women, married twice, and graced red carpets with enviable ease. But the relationships didn't stick. The roles he played often promised forever. In reality, Richard Gere's love life told a different story. He always seemed like he was searching, a former co-star once said, like he hadn't landed yet. His reputation as a spiritual, soulful figure added to the intrigue. Gere practiced Buddhism, followed the Dalai Lama, and often disappeared from the spotlight. Some said he was elusive, others said he was lonely. But one thing was always clear: he wanted something real, something that would last. The irony wasn't lost on his fans. How could the man who made us believe in love never seem to hold on to it? For all his romantic leads, Richard Gere remained untethered in the real world. Until later in life, when a different kind of love story finally began to unfold. For years, people asked, if Richard Gere could play love so well, why couldn't he keep it? That question followed him through red carpets and headlines. And no chapter drew more attention or more questions than his first marriage. It wasn't just unexpected. It was Hollywood chaos wrapped in glamour, a supermodel bride, a Vegas wedding, and a story that would define a decade. Welcome to the whirlwind of Richard Gere and Cindy Crawford. Cindy Crawford and the Vegas elopement. In December 1991, Richard Gere shocked the world by eloping with Cindy Crawford in Las Vegas. No media fanfare, no grand announcement. Just a quiet chapel and a stunning 25-year-old supermodel beside a 42-year-old movie star. The headlines exploded. Beauty and the Buddha, one tabloid called them. But behind the glitz was tension from the very beginning. Their 17-year age gap was more than just a number. It was a generational divide. Crawford was still defining her identity. Gere was already famous, spiritual, and deeply private. We were at different stages in our lives, Crawford later admitted. I was young. I didn't know myself. Fame added fuel to the fire. Every outing became a photo op. Every look, a headline. But inside their marriage, they struggled to connect. Crawford, at the height of her modeling career, was often away. Gere, wary of the spotlight, withdrew even more. Their appearances together were polished, but the intimacy faded behind the scenes. By 1995, their divorce was official. No mudslinging, no dramatic scandal, just an acknowledgement that love, even between two beautiful people, needs more than admiration to survive. For Gere, it marked the first time the world saw his restlessness exposed. The divorce was quiet, but the lesson was loud. Gere could find romance, but holding on to it was something else entirely. Still, he wasn't done with love. Not even close. And his next chapter would seem, at first, like a calm new beginning, a fellow actor, a baby boy, a home out of the spotlight. But even this new foundation would be tested. Enter Gere Lowell, the woman who almost changed everything. Love and loss. With Gere Lowell, when Richard Gere met actress Gere Lowell in the mid-1990s, it looked like a reset. She was grounded, intelligent, and had her own successful career. More importantly, she seemed to understand Gere's complicated relationship with fame. They dated quietly and married in 2002, after the birth of their son, Homer, in 2000. Fatherhood changed Gere. He was 50 when Homer was born, and friends say it softened him. He was completely focused, one insider shared. He was present. You could see he wanted to get it right. Gere also leaned deeper into his spiritual practices during this time, traveling, meditating, and supporting humanitarian work. But privacy came at a cost. Gere, more socially inclined, reportedly struggled with the isolation. She loved Gere, but life with him often meant solitude. As the years passed, their differences widened. Fame had faded, but the tension at home was quietly growing. In 2013, after more than a decade together, they separated. What followed wasn't gentle. Their divorce dragged on for nearly 3 years, with bitter court battles over finances and custody. The love that once seemed mature and grounded had turned into a storm of silence and resentment. By the time it ended in 2016, Gere was emotionally worn, but still searching. 3 decades in the spotlight, 2 failed marriages, and 1 quiet heartbreak after another. By the time Gere turned 67, many assumed he was done chasing love. But destiny had other plans. A woman from his past, a hotel on the Amalfi Coast, and a reconnection that would change everything. It wasn't loud, it wasn't wild, it was handwritten letters, deep conversations, and a love that finally felt like home. Whispers, and women between his marriages, Richard Gere's name never left the tabloids. Whispers of romances filled pages, some real, some pure fantasy. His on-screen chemistry with Julia Roberts sparked endless speculation. Were they ever more than co-stars? Fans wanted to believe it, but both always denied it. In 2014, not long after his split from Lowell, Gere was linked to Padma Lakshmi. Their brief romance was highly publicized. 2 high-profile people navigating fresh wounds and public interest. But it fizzled quickly. It was too much, too soon, a friend said. They were both still healing. Other names popped up. Priscilla Presley, Penelope Milford, even political figures. The rumors never stopped. But the truth was simpler. Gere wasn't playing games. He was genuinely looking. But his heart remained untethered. He was a romantic man in a chaotic world. Through it all, Gere stayed mostly silent. He never chased headlines or sought attention. "Let them say what they want," he once told a reporter. "I know what's real." Behind every rumored affair was a man longing for peace, for depth, for something that lasted. Enter Alejandra Silva. By the time Richard Gere was nearing 70, many assumed the chapters of wild romance and tender love stories were behind him. But in 2014, fate had other plans. In a quiet corner of Italy, inside her family's hotel along the Amalfi Coast, Gere crossed paths with someone unexpected. Alejandra Silva, a Spanish publicist and activist who was going through her own heartbreak. Alejandra was 35, in the middle of a painful divorce, and focused on raising her young son. She wasn't looking for love, neither was he. But something between them clicked, not with the flash of Hollywood romance, but with something deeper. A calm recognition, a sense of knowing. "We were destined," Alejandra would later say, recalling that first meeting. Richard didn't woo her with fame or fanfare. He wrote her handwritten letters. He spoke to her about meditation, meaning, and healing. Their conversations ran long into the night, not about careers or headlines, but about finding peace in a noisy world. It wasn't love at first sight. It was something better. It was soul-level understanding. Both had lived through pain, through scrutiny, through love that didn't last. But together, they created a space that felt untouched by the past. "He brought me calm," Alejandra once said, "and I gave him light." Their relationship didn't roar. It unfolded, quietly, beautifully, like a prayer answered after years of silence. Their connection surprised everyone. Friends, family, even themselves. But love doesn't follow logic. And sometimes, when two broken hearts meet, they don't shatter. They settle. And though the world would raise eyebrows at the age gap, Richard and Alejandra only saw alignment. Their next steps would prove it wasn't about timing or tabloids. It was about the bond between two people who finally felt seen. A bridge between generations and the start of something timeless. Crossing paths. Crossing generations. When Richard Gere, 68, and Alejandra Silva, 35, stepped into the public eye as a couple, reactions were mixed. Some called it surprising, others scandalous. But for Richard and Alejandra, it wasn't about age, it was about shared light. "It's not the number," Gere said in an interview. "It's the energy, it's the kindness, it's the soul." What brought them together wasn't youth or glamour, it was shared values. Both were deeply spiritual. Both cared about human rights, philanthropy, and healing. Alejandra had devoted herself to refugee aid and children's advocacy. Gere had spent years advocating for Tibet, meeting with the Dalai Lama, and raising awareness for global causes. Their love wasn't just romantic, it was rooted in purpose. Their bond transcended the typical script of Hollywood romance. They didn't host galas or pose for red carpets. They volunteered. They traveled. They spent time with each other's children. And despite public scrutiny, they found serenity in private spaces. Of course, not everyone understood. The age difference remained a talking point. But Alejandra shut down the noise with grace. "He has more energy than a 30-year-old, she said. "And his heart? It's the youngest I've ever known." Together, they weren't trying to prove anything. They were building something real, away from flashing cameras, toward something that felt sacred. What began as a quiet love soon grew into a sacred bond. But Richard and Alejandra weren't interested in spectacle. They didn't announce engagements or flood Instagram with photos. Instead, they planned something private, something spiritual, a ceremony not meant for headlines, but for healing. It wouldn't be televised. It would be whispered, serenaded, shared only with those who mattered. The wedding of a man reborn, and a woman who made him whole. A secret wedding, a public revelation. In April 2018, Richard Gere and Alejandra Silva exchanged vows in a private ceremony held at Gere's estate in upstate New York. There were no paparazzi, no designer-filled aisle, no Hollywood guest list, just family, close friends, nature, and a feeling of peace that had eluded Gere for years. The ceremony was intimate and deeply spiritual. Alejandra's father walked her down the aisle beneath a canopy of trees. Gere, ever the romantic, serenaded her with a song he wrote just for that moment. They recited vows centered on love, patience, and mutual growth. Tibetan prayer flags waved in the breeze, a nod to the faith that connected their hearts. It wasn't a Hollywood production, it was a sacred union. One of soulmates, not celebrities. "I feel like I'm in a true fairy tale," Alejandra said afterward. But it wasn't fantasy. It was real, tangible, built on the ashes of everything they'd survived. In the weeks that followed, the couple kept their wedding mostly private. But when asked by the press, Gere simply smiled and said, "I'm the happiest man in the universe." For a man who wants fatherhood in his 70s. In 2019, at the age of 69, Richard Gere became a father again. The news made headlines across the globe, not just because of his age, but because of what it represented. A man who once seemed devoted only to solitude had now chosen a life of loud laughter, bedtime stories, and scattered toys. And he embraced it like a man born to do it. Alejandra gave birth to their first son together in February 2019. A year later, they welcomed another. In just over 12 months, Gere became a father of 3, redefining everything we thought we knew about aging, masculinity, and purpose. Friends say Gere was all in: diaper duty, bottle feedings, sleepless nights. But this wasn't the frazzled panic of young fatherhood. It was steady, grounded, joyful. "I have more patience now," Gere told a close friend, "and I understand what matters most." For Gere, becoming a father later in life was not a burden. It was a blessing. It wasn't about legacy. It wasn't even about second chances. It was about being fully present. After decades of noise and spotlight, here was something pure. Alejandra often said Richard's energy never matched his age. "He plays with them like he's 30, she laughed. But more than that, he listened. He held space. And in doing so, he gave his children the thing he'd spent a lifetime searching for: deep, unconditional love, shared in real time. In Hollywood, age is often feared, something to hide, something to fight. But Richard Gere embraced it. And in doing so, he rewrote his own ending. He didn't just fall in love. He chose to live in it. But what made his transformation even more powerful was that it wasn't public. It wasn't performative. It was peaceful. Next, we step inside the quiet, joy-filled life Gere built far from the flashbulbs, with Alejandra by his side. Love beyond limelight. Life outside Hollywood. By the time Richard Gere became a father again, his relationship with fame had changed. He no longer chased roles or red carpets. He no longer needed to be the heartthrob. What he wanted was peace. And he found it in a life split between the United States and Spain. Together with Alejandra, he created a home, not a mansion. A rhythm, not a race. They lived between his quiet estate in New York and her family's roots in Madrid. No paparazzi, no entourage, just family, simplicity, and service. Alejandra continued her humanitarian work, especially focused on refugee aid and children's rights. Gere stayed committed to causes he's championed for decades: human rights, Tibetan freedom, and global health. But now, their activism had a family lens. They didn't just campaign for the world they wanted. They were raising their children in it. Public appearances were rare. When they were seen, it was usually while volunteering or walking hand in hand. completely unbothered by who was watching. Their smiles weren't staged. They were lived. A friend once said, "You can tell he's finally in his element." For Gere, this new life wasn't a retreat. It was a return to what matters. And perhaps, for the first time, his love story wasn't part of the performance. It was his personal masterpiece. For a man whose image was once carefully curated by studios and headlines, Richard Gere's real-life love story was refreshingly unscripted. But just when we thought we'd seen the depth of his transformation, he shared something that stunned everyone. A confession. One sentence, spoken with trembling honesty, that pulled back every remaining curtain. The man who once played every kind of romantic finally revealed the truth of his own heart. The heartfelt confession, "She's the love of my life." It came during an interview. Simple, unforced, unexpected. The host asked Gere about life, love, and Alejandra, and he paused, just long enough to let the air grow heavy. Then he said it. "She's the love of my life." The words didn't explode. They settled. Gere's voice cracked slightly, not from weakness, but from the weight of knowing. "She brought me back to joy," he continued, "not because of her age or beauty, but because of her light." That one sentence did what decades of headlines never could. It showed us the man behind the myth, the romantic who'd finally found the romance that mattered. Alejandra later said she wasn't surprised by his words, but she was moved. "Richard doesn't say things just to say them," she smiled. "When he speaks from the heart, he means every syllable." For Gere, this wasn't a performance. It was a reckoning, a moment of truth after a life lived in character. He wasn't reading a script. He wasn't acting. He was standing, finally, in the raw center of his own story. After years of being everyone's fantasy, he had found something real. And in that moment, Richard Gere reminded the world of something we all forget. Love doesn't always come early. But when it's real, it's worth the wait. The spiritual thread of Gere's journey. Long before he found Alejandra, Richard Gere found something else: peace through Buddhism. A lifelong devotee of the Dalai Lama and Eastern philosophy, Gere has always believed love isn't just passion, it's practice, a discipline, a spiritual unfolding. To him, love isn't about possession. It's about presence, about listening, about letting go of ego. In Alejandra, he found a partner who understood that completely, not just intellectually, but spiritually. She too had studied meditation, philanthropy, and the quiet call of service. Their marriage wasn't just romantic, it was sacred. Their daily lives reflect this alignment. They begin mornings in prayer. They meditate. They volunteer, not because it looks good, but because it feels necessary. Gere has said, "Marriage, if done right, is the highest form of devotion, not just to each other, but to something greater." Together, they've built a love that's rooted in more than attraction. It's rooted in dharma, in compassion, in a belief that life's deepest fulfillment isn't found in applause. It's found in stillness, in giving, in grace. They don't try to prove their love. They live it. Gere's transformation wasn't a reinvention. It was a return to spirit, to truth, to peace. But even with all this depth, many still doubted. Critics dismissed their bond. They questioned the age gap, the timing, the whirlwind. But what Richard and Alejandra proved next silenced every skeptic. Because while the world saw fantasy, what they built was one of Hollywood's rarest things: A love story that actually lasted. The fairy tale. Few believe by Hollywood standards their story shouldn't have worked. The age gap, the speed, the low profile. In a world addicted to drama and spectacle, Richard and Alejandra chose softness. They chose simplicity. And because of that, many didn't believe it was real. But it was, and still is. Together, they've created a blended, bilingual, spiritual home filled with children, dogs, garden walks, and meaningful work. Their wedding wasn't posted to Instagram. Their children's names aren't trending hashtags. They've done something rare in the entertainment world. They've built a family that's protected, not performed. Alejandra often says their connection was karmic. "We've known each other in other lifetimes," she once whispered in an interview. Gere agrees. "She's not just my wife. She's my mirror, my teacher." Their relationship teaches a quiet lesson. Real love doesn't have to shout. It doesn't need to convince. It doesn't always start with sparks. It starts with stillness. And it grows, not through grand gestures, but through the quiet choice to stay. After decades of being the face of temporary Hollywood love, Gere finally found the forever kind. In an industry where stories are written by studios and endings are often tragic, Richard Gere wrote his own epilogue. A man once known for running toward passion now walks slowly with peace. His story may not be the one the world expected, but it's the one he needed. And now, as he looks back at 74, he offers one final truth, not just for himself, but for anyone still waiting for their moment. The message behind the man. At 74, Richard Gere isn't interested in legacy the way others are. He doesn't crave statues or biopics. He's found something better: joy, stability, a sense of home. Love found him late, but it found him fully. Fatherhood in his 70s. True love after 2 divorces. Healing after years of emotional distance. His life is proof that timing isn't what defines us. It's the courage to try again that does. "I didn't think it would happen this way," he once said. But that's the thing about love. It doesn't follow your plan. It follows your heart. Alejandra isn't just his partner. She's the woman who made him stop searching. She's the reason he wakes up smiling. And in loving her, Richard Gere finally became the man he'd been playing all those years on screen. The romantic, the protector, the believer. And now, as the camera fades and the flashbulbs dim, he's not walking off alone. He's walking home, hand in hand with the love of his life. Richard Gere's journey proves that love doesn't follow deadlines. It doesn't always come early or easily, but when it's right, it's timeless. After decades in the spotlight, he's stepped away from red carpets and into something far more powerful: peace. With Alejandra Silva, he found not just passion, but purpose. Their union isn't just about romance, it's about healing, faith, and choosing joy when the world least expects it. In his own words, "Love came late, but it came exactly when I needed it most."